In 1972, a car was unveiled that broke the mold, made big news in small car design, and set the template for others to follow. Looking back, one might think this little hatchback was a shrewd piece of industrial planning, the product of calculating design committees and endless market research. But it's actually the story of one moment of inspiration that set many millions of wheels in motion. Wheels on a car that people needed, that people wanted, but above all, that people could have. This is the story of the Renault 5. Rising from the ashes of World War II, Renault had played a crucial role in getting a traumatized continent back onto its feet and behind the wheel with modest, robust cars like the 4CV. In the decade that followed, it was joined by bigger, more sophisticated models, the Dauphine, and its glamorous sister, the Floride. But these cars all shared a layout that by the late 50s was starting to become dated.
For many, many, many years, Renault had persisted with this kind of, what looks quite a kind of anachronistic rear-engine format. And indeed, they were criticised at the time for persisting with that format, even though the cars in question continued to sell quite well. But there was a seismic change in '61 when they introduced the Renault 4, which, as well as being deliberately and indeed brilliantly utilitarian and functional, was also front-engined and front-drive.
Au volant de la Renault 4 qu'ils ont choisi pour ses incroyables qualités d'endurance et de robustesse, les ingénieurs de Renault Engineering reconnaissent les terrains d'une future usine qu'ils doivent étudier pour une grande entreprise française.
Like a lot of post-war cars that motorised Europe, the Mini, the Fiat 500, the 2CV, all these cars helped put Europe on wheels.
Economical and reliable wheels were very welcome, but by the mid-60s, momentum was building for a change of gear. With pop culture and social politics capturing imaginations like never before, young people were growing up with great expectations. This dynamic new generation would soon be needing cars that reflected their modern lifestyles. The British Mini had embodied the spirit of the 60s. But for the decade to come, it would be a Renault that would capture the imaginations of motorists across the globe. However, the seeds of this project were to be sown in a most unconventional way.
Usually, marketing and product planning come up with a dossier, if you like, or a document called a cahier des charges, excuse my poor French, but which is kind of a document specifying what this car should be. And from that, the designer has the challenge of trying to sort of spark some creative life out of these words and produce a sketch. But that's not how the Renault 5 happened.
Instead of senior executives, it would be a young designer called Michel Bouet, who in his own spare time after his normal work was finished, would set the Renault 5 ball rolling.
He had a photograph of a Renault 4 and just sort of started sketching on top of it.
Renault historian Hugues Portron now looks after all of the original artwork Michel Bouet made whilst working on the 5. They're drawings that portray rare vision.
Michel Bouet, en 67, il va faire ce dessin, voilà, en mai 67. Et ce dessin est assez extraordinaire parce qu'on y retrouve déjà tous les éléments constitutifs de la Renault 5. Vous avez la forme générale, les 3 portes, vous avez les pare-chocs en polyester, les feux arrière relevés. Il ne manque que la face avant, qu'on ne voit pas sur ce dessin, et sur lesquels ils vont ensuite travailler.
After that, you get the impression that this project took off at great pace because everyone who saw it must have thought it was marvellous and that they were on to something that was really new.
Apparently the bosses at Renault at the time just looked at it and went, yeah, that's good. We don't need to change that. We don't need to fiddle with that. And that is deeply unusual in the car business.
Indeed, Bouet's design caused such a stir in the boardrooms of Renault that a small-scale model and then full-size mock-ups were rushed through. Then, on photos of these, Bouet worked on designing the new car's all-important face.
Pas tous très concluants, mais très rapidement, finalement, on va arriver à quelque chose de très simple, une calandre très dépouillée, très moderne, et que vous pouvez, par exemple, retrouver sur cette maquette de soufflerie. Et ça sera la forme définitive de l'avant. Mais vous voyez que finalement, il y a eu très très peu de modifications faites, et que même sur ces recherches un peu parfois hésitantes sur la face avant, le reste de la voiture est quasiment figé. Et ça, c'est assez extraordinaire, puisqu'encore une fois, il n'y a que quelques mois qui séparent ces deux dessins.
So the Renault 5 had begun its journey, and the project was given priority status. In 8 short weeks, Michel Bouet and Renault had managed to catapult small car design into the middle of the next decade.
If you look at what its contemporaries were like, most European manufacturers were still producing cars which aped Detroit in the 1950s. There was still a lot of chrome around. There were vestigial tail fins that existed. And what the 5 was, it actually looked extremely modern.
I don't even think you need to be a design student to kind of look at it and go, they got that right. I think the best ideas are the ones that you don't labour too long and hard over.
So by 1971, the full weight of Renault's industrial and marketing might was driving the 5 rapidly towards its launch. But sadly, with the cruelest of timing, illness would deprive the man who had sparked the entire project of the chance to witness his creation's debut.
Michel Bouet must have been very excited to see his project taken up so swiftly by Renault and developed with such zeal. Unfortunately, contracted cancer and actually didn't live to see his car hit the showroom, never mind become the massive runaway success that it did.
Indeed, the 5 was to be the great legacy of Bouet's short career. But this modern-looking car that Renault had created belied its tried and tested mechanical workings. As manager of Renault's historic car collection, Jean-Louis Toic takes care of many 5s, including one of the first.
On est bien en présence d'un véhicule dérivé de la Renault 4 et de la Renault 6. On voit par exemple cette commande de vitesse au tableau de bord qui est présente sur tous les propriétaires de Renault 4 et de Renault 6 ne sont pas perdus, puisqu'on retrouve exactement la même implantation mécanique. Un tableau de bord qui se veut assez simpliste. Bon, toutes les fonctions y sont. On a quand même une commande d'essuie-glace. On a des commandes de chauffage qui sont quand même très accessibles. C'est quand même beaucoup plus évolué que la Renault 4. Eh bien, sous le capot, rien de bien nouveau, puisqu'on n'utilise que de la mécanique bien éprouvée, bien rodée sur d'autres modèles. On retrouve la même implantation que la Renault 4, c'est-à-dire la boîte à l'avant, la commande de boîte au tableau de bord, et moteur issu de la banque d'organes Renault, Renault 6, Renault 8, et j'en passe et des meilleurs. Voilà. Donc, on n'a pas pris aucun risque sur la mécanique, on sait que ça va marcher, il n'y a pas de souci. La grosse différence notable par rapport à ce qu'on peut dire la Renault 4, c'était son châssis, puisque dans le cas présent, on a bien une carrosserie monocoque, et c'est ça la grosse évolution par rapport à la Renault 4, qui, elle, avait un châssis rapporté. Donc la particularité de cette voiture, c'est surtout ses pare-chocs en composite, qui protègent extrêmement bien la carrosserie. On en développera d'ailleurs après sur les côtés. Et aussi cette fonctionnalité, puisque avec une seule main, on en fait tout de suite un petit break. C'est quand même magnifique pour l'époque, 1973 quand même. On a déjà une modulalité incroyable.
With this mix of lifestyle-friendly features and dependable engineering, the new Renault 5s were loaded up and shipped across Europe, ready to begin a new era in modern motoring. In 1967, a rare moment of vision had launched Renault on a spontaneous journey into uncharted territory. But a harmonious marriage of proven engineering and head-turning looks meant when the small hatchback hit the showrooms in 1972, it was big news. In fact, for some, seeing the Renault 5 for the first time remains an unforgettable image.
Ça m'avait d'ailleurs marqué parce qu'à l'époque j'étais gamin, j'avais une douzaine d'années et j'avais d'abord vu apparaître cette publicité qui était ma Renault 5 est une sorcière.
Et la première fois que j'ai vu cette voiture, elle était conduite par une dame qui ressemblait effectivement à une sorcière, avec des gros yeux noirs et des longs cheveux noirs. Et j'avais dit, mais voilà, la R5 est une sorcière, mais la propriétaire aussi, quoi.
Funnily enough, I saw my first one in the Plaka in Athens, in Greece. That I was just happened to be a backpacking student when I saw one on an early advertising shoot. And I remember being just astonished that anything could look so smart. But, like all the best French cars, it had that visual chic with an extraordinary level of comfort. It actually had great ride. It was also one of the first cars where plastic was used expressively. The Renault 5 was the first one to do that bumpers. The lights were fitted flush, into the bodywork, and it was an extremely functional package.
It wasn't just these simple, elegant solutions to age-old problems that set the 5 apart from its peers. Interior space was incredibly flexible, giving its owners carte blanche to use it as they pleased.
And to drive, they would have found a car that was a world away in some ways from a lot of the small cars they'd been up to then. So, for example, compared with a rear-wheel drive, it had fantastic high-speed stability, an exceptionally comfortable ride, which would stand up today as exceptional. Also, perhaps a little unexpected, it was surprisingly quiet. The engines were very smooth and eager. And for such a practical car to not cost all that much money was a small revolution back then.
So here was a car that was both desirable and useful. Renault's factories struggled to keep up as demand exploded. However, world events would soon darken the mood, as simply driving a car became a huge challenge.
If you think back to the 1970s, in many sense, the early 70s was the hangover from the 60s. And by 73, I think all that optimism and all that free love and all the rest of it all brought to a shuddering halt by some very difficult things geopolitically and ultimately a dreadful energy crisis, an oil crisis prompted by serious unrest in the Middle East. And driving a car became a virtually impossible task. Indeed, even in Germany, for example, they passed legislation where you weren't even allowed to drive your car at the weekend. That's how tough things were.
It was all quite a shock, and even once the dire fuel rationing came to an end, petrol prices remained stubbornly high. Suddenly, car drivers had a new set of priorities.
Huge swaths of people in Europe and elsewhere where they were kind of forced to abandon larger, less fuel-efficient cars. Luckily for them, there was something as appealing as a Renault 5 to downsize into.
So sales of this frugal little car were much less affected by what was actually a catastrophic decline in car buying across the world. It was all in Renault's plan, of course.
Maybe we were lucky, but maybe we have just the right feeling to have the right product just prepared in advance for the circumstances.
Vous venez les enfants, je suis prêt.
But economy wasn't the only reason the 5 kept on selling. It seemed to have a character that was universally inclusive. It was soon clear that here was a car that appealed to that most elusive of market niches, almost everyone.
Il n'y a pas vraiment de profil type au lancement de la voiture. Bien sûr, elle s'adresse à une clientèle citadine, bien sûr, elle s'adresse à une clientèle féminine, mais finalement, ses qualités sont telles qu'elle va être adoptée par tout le monde, que ce soit des ruraux, des urbains, des jeunes, des vieux, des retraités, des actifs. Tout le monde va adorer cette voiture.
It quite quickly developed a sort of classless aura about it. It didn't matter what role you played in life, you could turn up in a Renault 5 and people wouldn't look down their nose at you.
We have done a lot of surveys afterwards to understand why it was a so huge success. And in fact, when you present the car to people in a survey, the Renault 5, the reaction was not, this is a beautiful car. No, not at all. This is a sympathetic car, like a pet. You can bring this car in your living room. Yeah? A sort of very personal relationship with the Renault 5. You can have some affection for the car.
Avec Renault, on est en confiance.
While Renault couldn't have predicted such an emotional reaction to the 5, it had designed the car with one fast-growing type of motorist in mind: women drivers.
Good morning. You want to do some shopping with me? Shopping with the most popular car in Europe today?
A small Renault that was chic was actually a novelty. I mean, the 4 was a very lovable car, but in no way could you call it chic. As a consequence, women liked the Renault 5 a great deal, young women, and it was seen as a trendy and fashionable thing to have. It was available in quite interesting colour schemes and a wide range of colours that made it more than a utility car.
Hola!
Hola!
It was the first car for them, or their personal car. The success of the Renault 5 was to follow the increase of working ladies and the need for the second car in the family. That's the reason why the Renault 5 was like a symbol of the new freedom for women. And this is probably on the social point of view, probably the main reason of the success of the Renault 5.
In 1973, a young woman from Pau was among the first to fall for the 5's charms. Marie-France Estenave is now a leading motorsport journalist.
C'était une voiture très féminine, très esthétique, très facile à piloter, très maniable pour faire des créneaux, parce que les femmes, on n'aime pas faire les créneaux, on n'aime pas se conformer trop au placement bien rangé. C'était une voiture qui correspondait parfaitement à la femme, que ce soit la femme sportive ou la femme BCBG. Elle lui servait pour tout, pour aller chercher les enfants à l'école, comme pour aller dans une soirée, aussi mondaine soit-elle. La Renault 5 était un petit peu la façon de draguer, entre guillemets, ou de se faire remarquer.
You understand now why I love my so exciting Renault 5? Bye. See you soon.
While it was this seductive combination of looks and feel that women fell for, it was a much more raw, macho quality that meant Renault could really let the 5 rip.
"54 events in 9 different European countries. The Renault 5 Cup, both spectacular and exciting, is the sister race of all major competition."
Renault's strong racing heritage meant that it was only a matter of time before the 5 was tuned up and raced in a one-make series where up-and-coming drivers entertained motorsport fans with some white-knuckle racing. It was all action, but Renault's long tradition of building cars that protected their occupants meant it was safe as well.
Ce sont des voitures qui étaient extrêmement travaillées sur le plan sécuritaire. Nous ne lancions pas une voiture, Renault Sport ne lançait jamais une voiture sans qu'il n'y ait pas eu des textes préliminaires sur la sécurité. Arceaux de sécurité, harnais, siège baquet, extincteur. Il fallait éviter tout ce qui pouvait être dramatique pour le malchanceux concurrent qui pouvait sortir de la piste. Donc des accidents, il y en a eu, c'est évident, mais c'était souvent que des pépins de carrosserie, même en tonneau, on n'a jamais eu d'incident grave.
Yes, it's true. All I do is for you. You make me feel a better shade of blue. All I do is for you. You make me feel a better shade.
The Renault Cup was just the beginning of what was to become an illustrious racing career for the 5, where, in its most fierce incarnation, the little hatchback would become a world beater. By the mid-1970s, the Renault 5 had staked its claim to the roads of Europe, winning hearts and minds with its playful style and serious practicality. Even a global fuel crisis had failed to dent its momentum, and it was this strength that persuaded Renault that this car should become le car. American cars had never majored in economy, but gas prices had become a burning issue, so it wasn't long before the thrifty fives could be seen cruising on and above many famous American thoroughfares. While le car achieved cult status stateside, the American influences were soon filtering back across the pond in the shape of some surprising new fives.
Eh bien là, on est devant une particularité, c'est une voiture un peu particulière, un peu spéciale, c'est une R5 Le Carvan. C'est un modèle qui a été produit par le carrossier Liez. C'est une voiture à destination utilitaire, enfin utilitaire de luxe comme on peut le constater puisque tout est moquetté. Quelques compagnies en ont acheté pour transporter quelques produits de luxe ou autres champagnes ou autres produits cosmétiques, je dirais, voilà. Assez sympa, avec ces petites vitres assez caractéristiques des productions de vannes de l'époque, avec donc ce panneau entièrement fermé. Voilà.
Driving a distinctive Le Car van would have been a perfect sign of the times, as individuality became the watchword for 1976. Skateboarding was a new, no-rules street sport, and punk rock the nasty new music. And the long, hot summer would see the birth of a new type of car with attitude. The hot hatch. And guess what? The Renault 5 was leading the charge once again.
By the late 70s, the car that in the early 70s was a kind of slightly roly-poly, fairly slow, good fun, comfortable car, had morphed into the original road rocket.
Sporting a 1.4-litre engine pumping out almost double the power, and with tighter and more responsive suspension, the Renault 5 Alpine was a pioneer of this new raucous way to have fun.
I mean, the idea on the face of a performance Renault 5 at the time might have seemed a bit silly, except that Renault had a tradition of producing performance versions of its budget cars. So, you know, there was a Renault Dauphine Gordini, tuned by Amadei Gordini. And there have been other sort of, if not hot, then slightly warmed over Renaults that were fun to drive and were quite good in sort of lower order motorsport. So the company had a tradition there. But on top of that, there was a broader trend to a movement to the idea of putting a big and powerful engine in a small car. I mean, it's almost invariably a recipe for fun. It goes faster than it looks like it should.
In 1978, there was one particular Renault 5 Alpine that was going a lot faster than it looked like it should. It was rally prepared, and it was being driven by a pint-sized Frenchman with buckets of talent. Experienced Renault team driver Jean Ragnotti was entered into the legendary Monte Carlo rally, but his 5 Alpine was at a huge performance disadvantage to the powerful Group 1 cars.
Quand on l'a engagé au Monte Carlo 1978, c'est une voiture qui, sur le papier, devait terminer aux alentours de la 8e place.
C'est David contre Goliath et on va avec des petits moyens, une voiture groupe 2, aller se battre contre des voitures de compétition.
Et alors, on est parti, puis les conditions météo, quand même, nous ont avantagé un petit peu, parce que comme cette Renault 5 Alpine est une voiture qui est très très maniable, avec la neige, avec les routes étroites, tout ça, en maniabilité, la voiture a été très très bonne.
La seconde place de Jean Ragnotti, la troisième place de Fréclin au Monte Carlo 78 va avoir un retentissement extraordinaire en France.
ce résultat a fait que la voiture a été connue du grand public au niveau de l'international. En France, elle était connue, mais au niveau de l'international, elle est devenue beaucoup plus connue à partir de cette deuxième place au Rallye de Monte-Carlo 78.
That legendary drive may have taken place over 30 years ago, but as Jean takes the wheel of his famous car once again, it's clear there's no rust on either of these old warriors of the road.
Alors la Renault 5 Alpine de rallye, à l'époque, il n'y avait pas de direction assistée. Physiquement, elle était un peu difficile à conduire, mais très efficace. On arrive à la chicane, celle-là, je vais la prendre. Donc, quatrième, troisième. Cinquième. Et on est à 190 km/h. Alors le gros point fort de la 5 Alpine, c'était son freinage. Elle a un freinage très puissant. On va arriver à la chicane, je vais freiner un peu fort là.
There will be plenty more heroics at the wheel of a Renault 5 rally car for Jean Ragnotti to look forward to.
La Renault 5 portes.
Back on the roads, ordinary mortals were finding as much as they loved their fives, growing families meant the five needed to grow with them, and Renault obliged.
Par son confort. La Renault 5 portes, une grande voiture.
It was almost the end of the 70s, but incredibly, Michel Bouet and Renault had planned a five-door 5 over 10 years earlier.
The claim for the Renault 5 was, we want to have a small car, not to be a reduction of a huge car, but a specific design. And that's the reason why they decided to launch the car with only 2 doors. But it was not so certain, so we were a bit anxious about the success of the car with only 2 doors, because it was so unusual that there was a risk. So we have prepared all the tooling for the 4 doors to be ready to reduce the minimum, the time to launch a 4-door if the launching of the 2 doors was not a failure, but something so-so. And in fact, we only launched the 4-door version 7 years later.
It had taken until 1979 for a full-blown 5-door to appear, but there was one corner of Europe that hadn't been able to wait that long. And 2 doors wasn't all the Spaniards added back in 1974.
Bien là, nous sommes en présence d'une Renault 7 ou Renault Siete. Donc c'est une voiture qui a été donc dérivée de la Renault 5 spécifiquement pour le marché espagnol. On en a fabriqué près de 200 000. C'est une production qui démarre en 1974 jusqu'en à peu près 1982. Il y a profusion de chrome. On abandonne nos pare-chocs en polyester. On est dans une pare-choc chromé, je dirais, un petit peu plus dans le style de la Renault 12. On a rallongé la plateforme. On a perdu ses fonctionnalités de banquette rabattable. Et bien, comme on peut le voir, notre Renault 5, elle s'arrête là. Et notre Siete est bien plus grande. Et on y a même mis une petite trappe. C'est bien évidemment ces 4 portes. Un intérieur assez particulier. On voit bien que c'est beaucoup plus luxueux, traité de manière positionnement gamme différent. On n'a plus des tapis caoutchouc, mais de la véritable moquette. Et quelques finitions un peu plus haut de gamme.
By the early 80s, whether it had 5 doors or 3, the Renault 5 still looked as fresh as the day of its debut in 1972. But underneath, cars were changing fast. And to keep up, the faithful little 5 would be needing a complete mechanical makeover. In the decade since its launch, the Renault 5 had transformed small car design. Its ability to appeal to drivers from every corner of life meant it was being exported to every corner of the world. This colourful car was sometimes regarded with such warmth that it was seen as one of the family. But in 1980, Renault unleashed a much less cuddly 5. A family car, it was not.
Renault operates in this kind of twin-track approach. It can build fairly conventional cars that appeal to as wide a possible audience. You know, car making is about selling cars and hitting the right kind of target audiences. But the sport guys and the chassis guys revealed themselves pretty quickly to know exactly what enthusiast drivers were after.
Renault's sport guys knew their stuff all right. It was expertise that saw a period of incredible achievement at the very pinnacle of motorsport. At Le Mans in 1978, a turbocharged Renault took the checkered flag for the first time in the company's history. And 1979 was even more historic. After 2 seasons of struggle, a Renault Formula One car with Jean-Pierre Jabouille at the wheel claimed not only Renault's first Grand Prix win, but also the first ever win using turbo power. This potent engineering marvel, pioneered by Renault in motor racing, was to become the company's signature component in performance versions of many future road-going Renaults. But in 1980, when building a performance version of the 5, Renault did a little bit more than just fit a turbo to the engine.
Renault produced the most extraordinary version of the 5 with a mid-engine, so it moved the entire engine and gearbox assembly behind the front seats, threw away the rear seats. The wings were stretched around much bigger wheels. I mean, it really was quite an odd-looking car, but bizarrely appealing.
L'intérieur est très particulier, il adopte un style un peu flashy, encore une fois, avec des harmonies de couleurs un peu particulières. On passe du rouge, bien évidemment, cette livrée rouge qui est formalisée par l'extérieur de cette voiture, avec des contrastes qui sont par exemple une magnifique moquette bleue et un style assez particulier pour l'époque.
I mean, just look at it now, a phenomenal car. And what, 10 years after the arrival of the original car, another car that kind of seemed to capture the era.
C'est une voiture merveilleuse, à tout point de vue, au niveau concept, au niveau moteur, boîte de vitesse. Et je pense que la Renault 5 Turbo, c'était un produit très haut de gamme, difficile à acquérir parce que voiture de très haute performance qui roulait très vite. À ce moment-là, eh bien, il fallait déjà faire attention aux limitations de vitesse.
If you were a highly skilled driver, it was fabulous fun. Like any supercar, really, a Ferrari or a Lamborghini, it was a car you had to treat with respect. You had to understand what it could do if you pushed it too far, and what it could do was spin. But if you knew what you were doing, it was an absolutely exhilarating car to drive. It just looked absolutely spectacular, and those Mark 1s are hugely collectible. In fact, I saw one advertised just the other day, £25,000 for an immaculate one. There are plenty of them survive because they're so treasured.
Of course, Renault hadn't given the Turbo 5 bizarre looks and race car handling just for fun. World Rally Championship rules meant that 400 cars had to be made in order to qualify for entry. At its first World Championship rally in 1981, with Jean Ragnotti at the wheel, the crazy-looking little car was about to make a very big first impression.
Quand on a pris le départ du rallye de Monte-Carlo 1981, c'est sûr que la voiture était un peu à ses débuts Et on était un peu inquiet sur la fiabilité, sur des choses comme ça. Et même sur le pilotage, parce que c'était un petit peu un cheval sauvage à l'époque. Et dès les premières épreuves chronométrées, on s'est aperçu que la voiture, finalement, était efficace sur la neige, sur le sec, sur tous les types de terrain, avec une petite difficulté en pilotage, parce qu'il y avait un temps de réponse sur le moteur turbo. Tous les moteurs turbo, surtout au début, lorsqu'on accélérait, la puissance arrivait un peu plus tard, et violemment. C'est une voiture qui était quand même assez puissante à cette époque-là. Il y avait presque 300 chevaux, il y avait 290 chevaux. Et lorsque nous arrivions sur les plaques de glace, la puissance du moteur faisait que quelquefois ça déséquilibrait un petit peu la voiture. Mais on est arrivé à la garder sur la route et à gagner la course.
Sa victoire au Monte-Carlo avec la Renault 5 était une grande délivrance pour Renault d'abord, puisque c'est la première fois qu'il a mené cette voiture à une victoire et qu'il en a ensuite engendré d'autres. Mais le binôme Ragnotti-Renault 5 ou Ragnotti-Renault n'a jamais dérogé.
Gauche à fond sur droite, très bon, vite, 4, 100 mètres.
Inevitably, the Turbo 5 was soon being overpowered by the new four-wheel drive Audis. But Ragnotti's dramatic style and approachable personality meant his and his car's popularity continued to grow as one.
La Renault 5 Turbo a eu beaucoup de succès en dehors de sa victoire au Monte-Carlo 80. Elle a eu beaucoup de succès parce que c'était une voiture spectaculaire, elle glissait beaucoup.
Droite à fond, serré droite. 30 mètres, droite à fond plus et 150 mètres.
On a eu là une osmose entre un pilote et un modèle.
Comme et Ragnotti.
Alors, tous les deux sont petits, mais tous les deux sont extrêmement sympathiques. Tous les deux s'adressent à tout le monde avec la même aisance. Et tous les deux sont d'une efficacité redoutable. Et ça, on le retrouve assez rarement entre un pilote et une voiture. Et ça, c'était absolument remarquable.
C'est une voiture qui, pour le public, s'amusait énormément de la voir passer dans des positions un petit peu difficiles des fois. Mais au volant, moi, je m'amusais, je me régalais. Et en même temps, je régalais le public par ces dérapages, ce qui fait que le contact entre le public et la Renault 5 Turbo et puis moi-même s'est fait très bien.
In the fight back against the four-wheel drives, Renault produced the ultimate version of its rallying 5 with the awesome Maxi Turbo. But it was in the original road-going 5 that Renault was really looking to the future. By 1984, after 10 years as France's best-selling car, nearly 5.5 million Renault 5s had rolled off the production line. But when it came to creating its successor, it was this popularity that meant Renault had rather a lot to lose.
When you have a huge success, you are afraid to replace the car, and we were so afraid that we have chosen a design looking like the first car. Even everything was completely new under the hood, and because the location of the engine, it was the transaxle and everything different, a complete new platform, but with not the same design, but something looking very close.
On a fait un design, certes, totalement nouveau, il n'y a pas une seule pièce commune, mais qui rappelle celui de la Renault 5, pour rassurer, et les décideurs sans doute, et surtout la clientèle. C'est une super 5, comme son nom l'indique, c'est une 5 plus que 5, et donc on retrouve dans ces gènes stylistiques tout ce qui a fait le succès de la Renault 5. Mais, comme l'a dit le président de Renault de l'époque, c'est un galet mieux poli.
But it was a very consistent success for the second Renault 5, but we were very scared before and very anxious at the launch about the success and the volumes of the new versus the old one.
Such was the enduring class of Michel Bouet's original design that despite being longer, wider and lower, the new 5 was hard to distinguish from its predecessor. It was unmistakably part of the 5 family. And now Renault Sport's tuning experts had a brand new toy to play with. By 1984, the Renault 5 had seen 12 eventful years roll by, from the dark days of fuel rationing to a new dawn of personal mobility. Eye-catching looks and unmatched practicality meant the little 5 had played its part with aplomb. Having successfully replaced the original with a completely new but very familiar Super 5, Renault had recognized that this car was born into a new, different era. An era that bore little resemblance to the decade just gone. An era with quite different demands.
I mean, it's a fascinating thing. It's how you can use the car industry and what happens in the car industry to reflect what's happening in society at large. And by the early 80s, which, you know, there are all those kind of cliched ways of kind of taking it off, you know, you had Filofaxes, yuppies. Suddenly, was this whole new generation of incredibly powerful but affordable hot hatches. And in the vanguard of that was the Renault 5 GT Turbo. I mean, connected and related to Bouet's original car, which was just a, you know, simple little runaround for anybody. Suddenly you had this kind of seriously potent hot hatch.
Some of its acceleration times were quicker than a Ferrari Testarossa. Once the turbo was spooled up, it was just phenomenally fast. But more than that, it had a superb chassis, and so it could really handle the power in a way that many small turbo cars had not managed to do before. Became hugely popular, had race series devoted to it that were again hugely popular to take part in and to watch. They were very spectacular.
J'ai eu la Renault 5 GT Turbo. Là aussi, c'était un côté sportif. Parce que j'aurais souhaité, dans ma jeunesse, faire du sport automobile. J'ai fait quelques rallyes, et quelques courses de côte et quelques épreuves en circuit. Mais je pense que j'étais plus démangée par le démon du journalisme que celui de la course automobile, car il faut du talent et tout le monde ne peut pas s'appeler Jean Ragnotti.
That car really put the Renault on the map as a very serious maker of affordable performance cars.
As the 80s turned to 90s, Renault kept the 5 so fresh with both luxury and economy models that it continued to build the outgoing 5 alongside its replacement, the all-new Clio. But inevitably, in 1996, when the 9,200,600th Renault 5 quietly rolled off the production line, it was actually the final word in what had become an epic story. The story of a design that had become not only the most popular French car ever made, but also a car that had taken both Renault and the whole automobile industry along an entirely new road.
I think it's fair to say the Renault 5 was the original Super Mini. So in that car, we got an entirely new genre of car, and it's the most successful genre of car to this day.
The Renault 5 has been hugely important to the French car industry and also the wider car industry. Obviously, there was no car like it. That's the whole point. It was unique in France when it came out. But it caused Renault's competitors, Peugeot and Citroën, to copy it.
On va retrouver partout les boucliers. La forme générale, il suffit de regarder dans la rue aujourd'hui, vous allez voir beaucoup de voitures qui ont cette forme générale inspirée de la Renault 5. Le traitement des bas de pare-brise, des ailes, etc. sont tous plus ou moins issus des travaux menés sur la Renault 5.
And the success was linked not only to the success of the design, but to have found a right concept consistent with the evolution of the society.
Renault sans la R5, c'est difficile à imaginer, mais Renault sans la R5, c'est Renault sans Clio derrière, c'est Renault sans Twingo, sans Kangoo, etc. L'histoire aurait été complètement différente, c'est absolument clair. L'A5 permet à Renault de rentrer dans l'ère moderne de l'automobile.
Indeed, the Renault 5's successor, the Clio, was in many ways an extension of the 5. Even though the new car could boast all new mechanicals, body shells, and next-generation refinements, much of the research and development, design excellence, wit and charm that had made the 5 such a success was carried across to the Clio, ensuring that it would be a fitting tribute to its predecessor. A fact celebrated when the Clio was crowned European Car of the Year. The popularity of the Clio and the explosion of the Super Mini as a motoring genre is testament to the 5's giant contribution to small car making.
If Le Corbusier had been designing a car, it might have looked a little bit like the Renault 5. Le Corbusier said of architecture, a house should be a machine for living in. This was a brilliantly modern little machine for driving in.
Indeed, it was living their lives with their 5s that for so many millions of people was, and still is, the reason why it transcends the mundanity of something that is, after all, simply a car.
Eh bien, effectivement, cette voiture, c'est une des premières voitures que j'ai pu personnellement m'offrir. On est là en 1982-83 et j'ai enfin accès à une belle auto, une auto sympathique. On a des vitres électriques, on a une direction assistée, on a un freinage digne de ce nom, on a un compteur compte-tour, enfin on peut déjà prétendre à quelque chose de sympa et moi je garde d'excellents souvenirs. C'est une voiture que j'ai gardée de nombreuses années et qui m'a vraiment apporté beaucoup de plaisir et de satisfaction. Mais cette voiture, je m'y revois il y a quelques années, quoi. C'est vraiment sympa.
I went back home to Northern Ireland in the summer, and my mother said, "Oh, you haven't seen these for a while?" And she opened up this big box, and there were all my little model cars. Right? My 2-year-old son went bananas when he saw them all, and he wanted to take. I mean, there were hundreds of them, and I thought, well, I can't take them all home. I've got some shelves in my office at home with model cars on them, and so I did an editing exercise. There was a Lamborghini Countach, a Porsche 928, a Porsche Turbo, and the only other little matchbox model that I brought home with me was an original Renault 5.